This is the Fair Isle Cup Cozy tutorial. This is intended to fit a tapered Starbucks reusable cup or similar. I'm doing it in Aran weight wool. I'm using Kelburn Woolen's Germantown. If your gauge is very different from mine, or if you have a different size cup that you're working with, you may need to adjust your needle sizes. And if it's still not working out for you, I've also included several alternative motifs. If you take a look at this repeating motif, and we're actually working from the top down, you'll see we've got a repeat of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. So every 7 stitches the motif repeats all the way around. So we're working with 49 stitches for the body of this cup cozy. And I've also included some other motifs that have a different repeat so that you can adjust your cozy size that way as well, by adjusting the number of stitches rather than adjusting the yarn weight or your needle size. A lot of times if there's ribbing, you're going to see that a pattern calls for a needle size 1 or 2 smaller for the ribbing than for the main portion, especially where you're using Fair Isle, because when people knit really tightly, their Fair Isle tends to pucker. This is a very introductory Fair Isle pattern. We don't have floats that we're having to catch here. All of our floats are very, very short. So as long as you don't have a really tight tension, you should be okay. Remember when you're doing your ribbing to tug the yarn tightly when you're moving from front to back of the needle to adjust from purl to knit and from knit to purl. I am going to be using the magic loop method, which uses a long circular needle. You can also use double pointed needles, and you can also use flexi flips or 2 short circular needles. I won't be doing a tutorial on any of those methods. Just use whichever one is most comfortable for you. So we're going to use the tubular cast on, and that's going to give it this neat knit 1, purl 1 edge that just rolls right into the K1P1 rib. And at the end we're using Kitchener stitch to bind off, which matches it as well, so that we don't have that hard edge at the top or bottom. We need a lot of flexibility because it has to fit on the cup, and then once it fits on, we don't want it to slide up or down. If you have big hips like me, you know the issue there, trying to get your pants to stay up. If you can get it over one part of you, it doesn't want to stay. So we want to avoid that issue, make the whole thing stretchy all the way through. So we're going to do a tubular cast on, which starts out a lot like a long tail cast on. I'm going to make a slip knot, and I am working from both ends of my skein. You can, if you prefer, estimate how much yarn you're going to use and form your slip knot further down, but I'm working from both ends just to make it easy on me. So I use my slip knot to anchor it on the needle, but because this is a tubular rather than a long tail cast on, it's going to be prettier if you've got this down here at the end and then drop it off when you come back so that you're not working into the slip knot. Again, you don't have to. I'm actually going to work my first 4 rows flat instead of joining them as well, but you don't have to do that. You can join yours in the round immediately. If you work them flat without joining for a few rows, then it's easier to see where you are and not join twisted and then get further into the project and discover you have made a Mobius strip by mistake. So for the tubular cast on, you're starting like a long tail cast on. You have the yarn anchored to the needle with a slip knot, and you're going to grip both strands of yarn in your left hand with 3 fingers. Now with your thumb and forefinger, you're going to part those 2 strands of yarn. And now we are in place. So I'm going to go under this front strand of yarn, pick up the back strand, tighten that up. That's 1. Now I'm going under the back strand of yarn, pick up the front strand, and tighten that up. And I'm going to continue until I've got 42 stitches on my needle. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, and 42. All right. So I'm now going to work back across in a K1 P1 rib. My first stitch here is going to be knit. And I'm going to purl all the way across or around if you have decided to join at this point. I'm going to do 4 rows of this, and then we will come back again. So I'll meet you back in 4 rows. Hey, we're back again. I am finishing up my 4th row of K1 P1 rib. It is the 4th of July weekend, and my headset is really loving all these boat noises, because this is the time when red-blooded Americans get drunk and fall off a boat is what this holiday is for. So I am at the end of my 4 rows. Now I'm going to take my contrast color, and I'm going to use this upcoming row to increase 7 stitches to get to the 49 that we need to have 7 repeats of that 7 stitch motif. You will have to adjust those increases if you've chosen a different motif. And we're going to start out, we're going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. I'll have those adjustments in the pattern for you so you don't have to do the math yourself, but it'll be different from this if you're trying to achieve a different number. So we've got 3. Now we're going to make 1 and then knit 6 times. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 2. Make 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 3. Make 1, 1, 2, 3, give me more yarn. 4, 5, 6, that's 4. Make 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 5. Now make 1. Comes another boat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've done that 6 times. Now we're gonna make 1. That's our 7th increase. So we've gone from 42 to 49 stitches, and then we will knit to the end. This is where I am going to join in the round and then knit around one more time with this contrast color, and then we're gonna pick it up with our Fair Isle motif. So I'm gonna knit all the way around, one more round with this contrast color, and then I'll be knitting all the way around with the main color. So you can see where we're at. So I have completed through this first row of contrast color here, and that's where my increases are. We're about to do our next row with the contrast color, and then a row just plain knit all the way around a round of our main color. So I'll meet you back when we finish that and we're ready to start our Fair Isle, where we are working with 2 colors on the same round. We are back. The wind is blowing, the boaters are boating, and there is a deer crashing around in the woods like a Sherman tank. I am ready to start my color work. I am now holding both strands of yarn. If you are not already a Fair Isle knitter, just continue holding your yarn the way that you're comfortable with. You're an English style knitter, hold 2 strands side by side on your right hand. If you're continental like me, hold the 2 strands side by side on your left. Now you'll see that I'm using my contrast color right here. It's closer to me, it's on the left, and the main color is on the right. This is for color dominance, because as you're working each stitch, the strand that is closest to your needle is going to have just a little bit less slack in it than a strand worked from over here. And so whichever strand has a little bit more slack in it is going to puff just a little bit more than the other one. And as you complete your Fair Isle color work, you'll see that the one held on the left shows up a little more strongly than the one held on the right. And so when you have a contrasting color that you want to pop out against a field of a background color, you want to use that contrasting color as your dominant color. Now there are some people who believe that there's no such thing as dominant color, and that the rest of us just don't understand tension, and that we are like crafting some kind of global conspiracy theory. People will show them photos and they'll say those photos were faked. It's like a whole flat earth thing. So color dominance, it's real. If you believe it's not, you can go on the internet and fight about it. There are lots of people doing that. But for our purposes today, just, pretend along with me. Color dominance is real. Keep your contrast color to the left of your main color. If you're working with one color in each hand because you're already comfortable with that, or you just want to try it out today, keep your contrast color on the left, keep your main color on the right. And we are back, and we're going to start the color work portion. Now, when you are working Fair Isle, you have got the color that's going to show the stitch that you're working, and then you have the yarn that you're not using at the moment, which has to run behind that stitch. So if you have always been a tight knitter, this is where you're going to have to relax that tension, because the yarn that you're not using is called a float, and it is floating behind the yarn that you're working the stitches with. And if you're pulling that tightly, what you're actually doing is puckering your work, and it's going to do this all the way through. It's going to be really unattractive. If you're doing a garment, it's not going to fit. It'll be very hard to see all of your pretty color work. It'll be all bunched up, and blocking, we like to say that'll block out, but when it comes to working your floats too tight, that's not going to block out. There's no way to add additional slack back in where it doesn't exist. You can flatten it out a little bit, but the best thing is to release that death grip on your yarn. Make sure your floats have got enough slack in them. And the first few times you do Fair Isle, however loose you think it's supposed to be, you're going to pretty quickly find that wasn't actually loose enough. So remember to release that tension as you are working across, doing your color work, so that you're not pulling tight on that float. Now I am going to have my dominant color to the left of my background color. So when you look at this cup cozy, you'll see that we have a pattern in yellow, and so I want that to be my dominant color. I want that to pop out when we're looking at the background color, which is my main color. My MC is that peacock color my CC, my contrast color, is that goldenrod color, and I want that to show up more. So if you're holding the yarn in your right hand, for English style, you're going to do the same thing. The contrast color will be to the left. If you're holding your yarn in two different hands, your background color, your MC, is going to be on the right hand. Your contrast color, your CC, the color you want to pop out, will be on the left. Now, there are some people out there who fervently believe that the idea of color dominance is a myth. And people will show them photographs. They'll say, you know, they'll explain the physics of it. When you are working a stitch, if you're grabbing this close color right here, it's going to have less slack in it than if you're reaching further and pulling that through. The one that you're reaching further to get is going to have just a little more slack in it. And so when you finish your project, if you've maintained consistently, your dominant color is a little bit further away, it's going to pop out more, it's going to puff up more just because of that tiny additional bit of slack. But it's like a flat earth conspiracy thing. There are people who will get really heated on the internet and say that all these photos and all of these demonstrations are fake, color dominance does not exist, and that everyone else is just really bad at tensioning their yarn and somehow it keeps showing up the same way over and over again. If you want to fight about it, you know, go on the internet. There are plenty of people who will be happy to engage in that fight with you. But for the purposes of this tutorial, if you are a conspiracy theorist and believe that there is no such thing as color dominance, just play along with me this time, okay? Or don't, and just indulge me. So I'm going to hold my yarn on my left finger because I'm a continental knitter. If you're an English knitter, just hold both of your strands on your right hand. And I am going to start working my pattern. So the first round of the Fair Isle is going to be, they're all a 7-stitch repeat, so it's going to go contrast color, and then 2 stitches of the main color, 2 stitches of the contrast color, 2 stitches of the main color. That's your 7-stitch repeat over and over and over again. So I'm going to say to myself 1, 2, 2, 2 as I go so I can remember what I'm doing. So I'm going to begin to work it. 1, 2, 2, 2. And I'll do that again all the way around. 1, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, I lost it. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, magic loop. I am not as proficient at magic loop as I should be. Okay. Two. 1, 2, 2. 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. Now I've done something down here. When I fixed my magic loop, I didn't fix it. 1, 2, 2, 2. I see I pulled through at the wrong spot. I'm not actually... There you go. I've actually got the first stitch of the round. There we go. Pop. Okay. Oh, that's ugly. All right, that's fixed. All right, so I've got my first round on here. And all the following rounds we're going to be doing the same thing. Do I have that on there? There we go. Good Lord. Okay. So the following rounds we're going to be doing the same thing. We're working a 7-stitch repeat. The next round is going to be starting with contrast color 1, 1, 4, 1. When I am working with Shetland wool, which is a lot more rustic than a lot of the yarns that most Americans usually work with, I'm from the southeast where it is hot all the time. We are on the 35th parallel north of the equator here. And there is no part of Europe that far south. So a lot of those really warm yarns that are so popular in Icelandic or Norwegian or knitting in the UK, they're a little hot for us. And so we get really picky. We like our yarns light and smooth and soft because we're wearing them next to our skin. We're not layering up for cold winters. So when I use that Shetland wool, as it's running across my finger, I don't like that feeling of that rustic wool dragging. So I use a Norwegian knitting thimble, which is great for continental knitters when you've got both strands held on your finger. It actually holds it up like this, and it also makes it easier to grab your main and contrast color without twisting it. I'm not using it today. This is a really smooth wool. It's not irritating me, but if you find that you like color work and you're knitting continental style, you might want to try a Norwegian knitting thimble out. So we're going to do, starting with our contrast color, 1, 1, 4, 1, all the way around. 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1. Now this pattern has been designed so that there's no float long enough that you're going to need to trap it. If those floats get too long, they're going to snag. And of course that's a problem if you've got like gloves or a sweater, a garment that could get snagged on things. But it's also just a problem because a float that's too long, as it kind of pulls, it can distort your fabric. So usually the advice is if you're going to have a float 5 stitches or longer, you want to trap the yarn that you're not working with behind the yarn that you are working with. So if I were to do this stitch here in the same color, if I were to have 5 in a row instead of 4, then partway along I would have wanted to trap that behind, encase that in a stitch. I'm not going to do that here. There are some people who like to trap almost every stitch, and I think that creates a really dense fabric. and it's a lot easier to see the color that you're not using peeking out between the stitches. There are some people, especially if they're working with a really grippy coarse yarn, who will just let it go without ever trapping any floats. Some people, when they're working at a fine gauge with a fingering weight yarn, they'll let it go up to like 8 stitches before they trap it. The larger your gauge is, the more frequently you're going to need to trap it. Usually the smaller ones, you might have a lot of stitches per inch, a lot of stitches per centimeter, and they'll let those floats go on more stitches. But in this case, this pattern doesn't have any really long floats. Right there, that 4-stitch float is the longest that we've got, so we just let that do what it's doing. As long as you're not pulling it tight, it's going to be fine. If you are pulling it tight, there's no fix for that, because the amount of yarn that you've worked into your fabric is the amount of yarn that you've worked into your fabric. You can't lengthen it after the fact. So blocking's not going to help. You know, washing it is not going to help. You just need to, unfortunately, rework it, working more loosely, which can be really frustrating because you're putting a lot of labor into your work. There's a lot of skill that goes into your craft. And sometimes I go into denial when I'm working on something. I'm like, well, maybe this problem will just go away. Sometimes I need to put my project aside until I can emotionally distance myself from it and reconcile myself to losing the amount of time and labor that I've put into it, and then rip back to where the problem started so that I can complete the project the way it needs to be completed and be satisfied with the result. But a lot of times I don't want to do that. I just want to power through and then somehow end up with the result I wanted, even though my technique needed work or I made a mistake. So if you're finding that your floats are really tight, if they're puckering right now, you can keep going if you want to just use this as a practice instead of a functional cup cozy afterward. You know, adjust it as you go and see if by the time you're done you have mastered the tension or at least improved it a lot. But if you want, you know, if you're a project knitter instead of a process knitter, if you really, really want a functional cup cozy out of this and you're finding that you're starting to pucker, or you can see some of the stitches sort of popping out or popping backward because those floats are too tight, then this is probably a good time for you to stop and give it another shot. You can work a lifeline in right here in this uninterrupted row of main color. You can work that in with a yarn needle and then just rip all the way back to it. Or if you're using wool like this, it's pretty grippy, you can just rip back usually and the stitches will stay standing up right where they were, and you can pass your needle back into them again to pick them up. I am very skilled at frogging my work and then picking it up again. This is a process that I go through quite often. So I have worked all the way around the second round of color work. We've got a few more rounds. I'm gonna shut the camera off, come back in again when we are on our decrease round as we're getting ready to do the other portion of ribbing. So I'm gonna meet you guys back when we get to this section right here. Hey, and we are ready to decrease. We are going to end up down at 38 stitches, which is a decrease of 11 down from our 49 stitches, which was 7 repeats of 7. So we are going to use our contrast color. We're going to knit 2, then we're going to knit 2 together, and now we're going to knit 2, knit together, knit 3, knit together, all the way around. So we're gonna do knit 2 together, and then knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 2, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 2, knit 2 together. Keep going without me, I have to adjust my magic loop. I'm being really cruel to my magic loop here. Come on, baby. All right. Together. So our next round, we're going to knit with our contrast color, and then we will start the ribbing in the following round, because if we start the ribbing with our contrast color in the next round, we're going to get those purl bumps between two different colors, which is what we don't want to see. So when we finish this decrease round, we will have 38 stitches, and then we will knit around with our main color, and then we're gonna start in with our K1P1 ribbing. We're gonna do 3 rounds of that, and then I'll come back to you for the Kitchener stitch bind off. If this were a Fair Isle pattern that had a lot of long floats in it, you would probably end up with some sections where you needed to capture a float in roughly the same spot as you had done it on the previous row. So in the future, as you're working Fair Isle, keep an eye out for that. You don't want to trap your floats in the same vertical column, because you'll start to get a little bit of laddering effect in between your stitches, and the more often you do it, the more visible it becomes. So we're gonna work all the way around in this main color, and then we're gonna do 3 rounds of K1P1 ribbing, and then we're gonna finish this off with Kitchener stitch. See you in a minute. Okay guys, here we go. We are going to do a tubular bind off, which is very similar to the Kitchener stitch, only instead of joining what's together on our needles, which would make, instead of a cup holder, it would make a very tiny hat, it's going to create a bind off that mirrors this cast on right here. So the setup, and you'll notice I don't have a yarn needle here. I went and checked my purse and I didn't have a yarn needle. I had 2 broken pens, a cough drop, 2 tape measures, a souvenir penny my kid flattened on the incline railway, and my vaccine card, which apparently I left at the bottom of my purse underneath all the broken pens. That's probably not a good idea. I went out to my mom's garage. She had a lot of spiders, a box full of broken glass and wood ash for some reason, and another box labeled hopelessly tarnished silverware. So, and her sewing kit is just hand sewing needles for repairs. Can't get this Aran weight yarn through that. So I cut the tube on one of the broken pens. So get your yarn needle out. Don't do this, okay? Get your yarn needle, for Pete's sake. And we're gonna do our setup right here. We're gonna pass through the first stitch on the needle, which is a knit stitch. From the front, we're gonna pass through as if to purl. And just tighten that yarn up. Now we're gonna come around from the back and then pass through that purl stitch as if to knit. And that's our setup. That gets our yarn where we need it to be in order to start the repeating movement that we're going to do all the way around all 38 of these stitches. Okay, so we got that. Now the very first stitch is a knit stitch. We're going to pass your yarn needle, not your pen tube, through as if to knit. Pull your yarn through, drop it off the needle. Now we're going to work into the next knit stitch, and you're going to pass your needle through as if to purl. I have already started hearing firecrackers. It's still light outside. So we pass that through as if to purl. Now on to our next purl stitch. We're going to pass the needle through as if to purl, and then drop it off your knitting needle. So that is 2 stitches worked. And then you're going to come up again from behind. Sneak in there, pass it through that next purl stitch as if to knit. Crazy person. So we have completed 2 stitches and set up the next 2. Now we're going to just keep repeating what we did. We're going to work with the first knit stitch and the second knit stitch, and then we're going to work with the first purl stitch and the second purl stitch. Alright, pass it through from the front as if to knit, drop it off the needle, and then pass it through the next knit stitch as if to purl. Alright, now we're working with our purl stitches. Pass it through the first one as if to purl and drop it off your knitting needle. Then come in from behind, poke your yarn needle through there, peekaboo. Pass it through that second purl stitch as if to knit. Pull that yarn all the way through. So that's the second time we've performed that entire procedure, and you're starting to see right here where that just rolls right over without having that firm edge that you see when you use a traditional bind off. And it's going to look a lot like this cast on right here. So just keep on doing that with your actual real life yarn needle, because you came prepared. And when you get all the way around, you work your last stitches, go ahead and weave in your ends. If you are using acrylic, don't bother trying to heat block this, because this has ribbing and you really don't want to block ribbing. If you are using wool, you can soak this in water, then press the water out, roll it in a hand towel to get some more of the excess water out. And then just lay it out to dry. You don't want to pin it out with this ribbing. If you had a larger project with a larger stockinette section, this Fair Isle is in stockinette, you could block that, by pinning it out. But this project is so small, if you try to do that, it's going to also stretch your ribbing out and you'll lose the elasticity because you blocked your ribbing, which you don't want to do. So go ahead as you finish up, weave in your ends. If you worked flat at the beginning, then use your cast on tail to seam up that gap, and you will have yourself a cup cozy. If this is your first Fair Isle project, congratulations. gonna sign off here because I cannot stand looking at myself using this tube here as a yarn needle. This is just hideous, guys. Take it easy. See you next time.